All right. Hello, everybody. This is session 8 of the Unordinary Bible study, where we focus on a contemporary philosophy-based focus discussion that semblances a postmodern-esque framing of not just talking about the Bible, like I mentioned, and that this I want to encourage an interfaith or intrafaith dialogue here. I think that sort of discussion is important, and I think it's unfortunate that I mean, most Bible study focused communities are mostly just focused on talking about a Christian theology based framing rather than having a more contemporary, open perspective that is more multicultural, multi-ethnic. So I'm really trying to encourage that discussion because I feel that there's these converging commonalities among especially popular mainstream religions, whether it's the Abrahamic faiths like Judaism, Christianity, Islam, or other, more the less popular uh, religious affiliations and denominations that are not popular in Western culture. And again, this is a partnership um, collaboration effort with the Active Inference Institute. And I always tend to give like these 5 minute introduction um, to what this is about. So, as I mentioned, on the one hand, this is not your ordinary Bible study. We don't just work through the Bible and passage by passage. I like to treat scripture as a codex, and we're not just working through the Bible. It just kind of seems to be my comfort zone because of like where I was brought up and just how I make these metaphysical framings into the discussion. And we could talk about any religious scripture. And another disclaimer I want to make is even though I do have doctoral colleagues jump on these calls every so often. We tend to have two. I tend to have two doctoral colleagues that frequent these calls, but I suppose they're not here today. And I just want to, regarding this disclaimer, I just wanted to say that, we don't hold ourselves as an authority about talking about scripture or what it means to have faith. This is an open, respectable, multi-ethnic, multicultural, open perspective-based discussion. Mostly revolving around, what it means to be spiritual and how, having different talking about abstractions of spirituality and how it applies uh, to our lives personally and interpersonally and intrapersonally. As a collaboration, a partnership collaboration with the Active Inference Institute, um, what the lens that I'm using has to do with how we perceive the world and act and keep track of a prior history of the ways we engage with the world around us. So active inference encompasses this idea largely about how we as agents that we have this degree of autonomy to perceive and engage with the world around us, and how we keep track of our engagements and our interactions and conduct ourselves. Now, you're probably thinking, well, this sounds a lot like much of what literature and psychology covers about human behavior and how animals behave. There's a lot of investigation into what reframings would be appropriate in developing modern AI systems. So active inference has gotten a lot of attention in that domain, and certain key framings from active inference, like generative models as opposed to generative processes, where a generative model has to do with kind of like thinking about how our beliefs are impacted by our perceptions, and that this has to do with how we experience the world based on how where history of engagements and how that has impacted us. Um, and a generative process then would be, as opposed to a generative model, we have these biases of how we engage with the world around us, right? And we can only perceive so much of reality, and there are these self-evidencing factors, right? Self-evidencing is another big term thrown a lot in active inference, where active inference likes to incorporate, although there's controversy about the rigor, about the use of the free energy principle, and how we try to as we're engaging with the world around us, we don't want to be too surprised, right? So we want to maximize our capacity to optimize our fitness and how we expect what's going to happen, in how we understand reality, throughout a lifetime of our interactions or certain moments of how we engage with the world. And basically, um, we want to minimize. We don't want to be too surprised, because we don't want to be too thrown off guard regarding like how we deal, how we leverage trade-offs in how we engage with the world, right? Like we're thrown in certain circumstances. Especially day to day, right? And that has an impact on our expectations and how we ought to conduct ourselves, making decisions, planning ahead, and interacting with other agents, right? And there's different kinds of agents, right? So we can think of us as humans, maybe being generally general intelligent agents, although there's some contention that humans are general intelligent agents. And then there's this over fascination of artificial general intelligence systems, and we'll get a little bit into that in this session a bit, because I do want to talk about AI and what that has to do with having a discussion, a theologically focused discussion. But as agents, there's this problem with bounded rationality, that we are imperfect reasoners, and that through self-evidencing that we notice certain things, but we might not notice other things. So there might be hidden variation about the world around us, and through self-evidencing, things might be revealed based on our interactions. So active inference has a lot. There's a lot of motivation using the active inference lens, especially not just in AI research, but it can apply to so many other fields of study, and especially having philosophically focused discussions, and especially like having Bible study. And perhaps this is more of a metaphysical, appropriate for metaphysical framings, or call it perennialist, postmodernist focused conversations about talking about theology, and especially philosophy. Okay, so I think that's a good introduction to these sessions, and why they could be meaningful. for especially for people who are, they don't want to go to an ordinary Bible study where, they're just going to go through certain passages that they expect to go through. It might be a read along, and maybe there's not much room for a relatable discussion about like how we go through life and how we might relate to whether it's going through scripture in the Old or New Testament of the Bible, or we go through the Quran, or it could be anything. Anything relevant to that has theological implications in terms of how we derive meaning and how that frames our motivations and guides our decision making, right? Because that could be important for people to ground their reasoning and how they treat others in the world around them. There's a lot of arguments from the apologetic side, not just from Christianity, but even people that are agnostic or they're atheistic. They'll still, they might still argue for some grounding in their reasoning and their engagements with the world around them. So I've always I was an atheist for a very long time, and then I found active inference to have like this appealing framework that gets me to think about how we're agents and how we engage with each other. And then there's this interesting postmodernist framing that I've been building on, which I thought is pretty interesting. I guess even though I did kind of give a kind of a reframing overview, like building into a lot of the perspective I've laid out in previous Bible study sessions. I'm going to pop open some of my notes on Trello that I thought are pretty appealing to kind of envelop this framing, because a lot of people that are Christian apologists, or they feel that God exists, or and that has some impact in their lives, right? Because for a long time that I didn't understand what God meant, and I had to really think deeply about that for a while, and I became um, involved in my local church community. I'm not too involved, but I like to go to my Saturday night sermons, and I've had some interesting back and forths with my local church pastor. But I've kind of built some built a little bit of credibility on Clubhouse. For those of you who are familiar with the Clubhouse platform, and there's some interesting remarks that I want to bring up, and then I'll build on those remarks. So let me start with some of these remarks here. So, okay. The capacity to harness knowledge is contingent upon how humans as agents are capable of generating and augmenting natural language systems, which then builds on how agents optimize cooperation capacities to preserve group as well as individual fitness. And this also has to do with how we engage with our environment too. So how we preserve certain aspects of our environment that then complement our fitness, because a lot of people have contention that when we make speculations about how the economy and society works, that we exploit resources and one another, and that the goal here is that we should figure out ways to complement how we work in groups and collectively. That's basically what I'm building on with this first comment. Then the conception of God emerges from natural language semantic structure cohesion. Now, what we can build on here is there's two references that I want to build on, right? There's Genesis 1, and there's John 1, 1 through 14. So come on, open up. Got my pop-up blocker. Come on. Genesis. Here we go. Okay. This is showing so Genesis 1, I'll do a screen share. Let me do a screen share real quick here. All right, so for those of you who are unfamiliar with Bible Gateway, there's a couple things you can do here. You can have multiple verses show up at a time from different passages, right? So like this is a pretty cool feature for those of you who are unfamiliar with either you use Bible app, or for those of you who are Christians, or maybe you go through Bible app, or I prefer Bible Gateway, but even though there's ads all over it, it's whatever. It's kind of also old school, but anyway, what you could do here is you could put one passage here, and then you could put another passage here. So the way this would work is the semicolon kind of splits them apart. But anyway, so the way I start with my framing is, as I mentioned here, and going through my remarks. So I said the conception of God emerges from natural language, semantic structure, cohesion. So this kind of builds on how we're different from every other life on Earth, right? That we have this capacity to develop natural language semantic structures that then enables us to develop abstract capacities of thinking, right? And then the capacity to conceive of God, right? And then that itself, like this capacity of using natural language to communicate in groups and then collectively conceive of God, then leads into Genesis Genesis 1 and John 1 verses 1 through 14, right? So Genesis 1, then it has to do with, okay, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So it gets a little bit more involved than that, but you kind of see where that's going. Everybody knows about the beginning of Genesis 1, right? So I'm not going to go through the whole passage, right? And then John 1 verses 1 through 14 then is basically says in the word in the beginning, the word was God, and the word was with God, right? So this is going from the Old Testament then to the gospel in the New Testament, right? So there's four main gospels, right? But so basically, like that, what they mean is kind of the same thing. What does the beginning entail? And then I make that relation here based on how we are able to reason through natural language, like the very beginning of that, which led to Mesopotamia and Indus, like ancient India, right? The Indus Valley, right? So like those are considered. There's controversy about like the very first civilizations that ever started up, but the very moment that civilizations happened, right? Like ancient civilizations, the like very beginning of human like agent societies, right? or society of agents, right? Or I like to call it society of human-like agents, right? The very beginning of that is the moment God created the heavens and the earth. So then creation is has to do with the perceivable universe, the beginning of the abstract universe of perception for humans to engage with one another and conceptualize God. So this is a bit different than the ontological argument approach. We're arguing for the existence of God and then tying that together with what in Christian what in mainstream Christian apologetics you have the three stages: creation, the fall, and redemption. So this is pretty consistent, but it's not. Again, this is a metaphysical. Obviously, this is a metaphysical interpretation regarding like creation being an emergence factor, right? Like this, the emergence of human-like reasoning faculties of abstraction, which relies on natural language semantics, and how we augmented those semantics to have written grammar and how we communicate, which led to now industrious globalized society, right? So like the possibility for all that, like from the beginning, represents the very first civilizations. Now, um, okay, so I mentioned creation, the fall, and redemption. So I'm doing a little bit of a different spin here because I don't want to repeat things I said in the previous Bible study session. So I'm going to connect certain talking points, which I think a number of mainstream Christian apologists who might not totally agree with my perennialist approach to they'll understand the connections that I'm making, and I'm not saying that Christianity is the truth necessarily. I think that we can find truth within our how we conduct our being within Christianity. That would be a personal, an interpersonal realization, or what I like to say, respectively, you tie the personal realization with special revelation, and then that interpersonal realization would be general revelation, and we can get into that a little bit later. But those weren't the topics I wanted to build on. So now the fall represents how we're imperfect reasoners. So we go from creation, and then stage two, which and maybe we're gonna get fancy here and tie in these three stages in Christianity, arguably also maybe Islam, but I'm not going to speak with confidence about Islam because I don't have. I'm still trying to understand that the metaphysical connections I can make with the Quran. So I don't want to speak with confidence about Islam, but I do think that we can treat Islam and Christianity, for instance, as like separate coordinate systems. And then we can do like a change of basis sort of transformation in terms of reasoning about of like, okay, how does Christianity and Islam possibly represent the same ideals in terms of what does God represent? What does that mean for humanity, right? And how the way, the truth or the way is represented. So I think there's equivalence here that they, now that's based on metaphysical interpretation, right? So you have to do a lot of metaphysical sword dancing here to show that okay, perhaps Christianity and Islam are appreciating the same things and they're looking for the same things and they condone the same things. So in terms of what God means, what humans, what this three-stage process that humanity goes through. And arguably, one could say there's a cyclical nature to these stages that society begins. There's the fall that represents how we imperfectly reason with one another. And then we kind of have to make up for how we try to deal with our imperfect reasoning and how we resolve conflict amongst each other as a species. And then stage three, redemption, is like when we make up for the conflict that we have, and how we engage with our environment and not just other humans. This builds on the Gaia hypothesis. So I think Ryan knows about my spin on the Gaia hypothesis. I will give a little tiny overview of that. Gaia hypothesis has to do with how we can think of the Earth housing. Well, okay, so originally there's contention about the Gaia hypothesis making the claim that the Earth is an organism that houses the biosphere of other organisms, but maybe we could just say this is why I call it a reframing of the Gaia hypothesis, that the Earth represents a habitable ecosystem for a biosphere of organisms with different roles in which all the organisms co-evolve to maintain the integration and needs of the biosphere over time, because the interactions amongst the agents and the environment are not in like a static flux, but there's there's dynamics in play here, because all these agents are interacting with the environment simultaneously. They have different roles and they engage with each other differently, right? There's diverse ways in which all agents that co-inhabit and co-evolve within the biosphere, engage with one another. Some of them, they prey on each other. So you have like kind of like a predator and prey relationship with some of, with some agents within certain habitable confines of the biosphere, right? So there's different. Um, so we could think about then, okay, well, all the agents or different organisms represent, different functional roles of facilitating how the biosphere is managed, right? Yeah, and it's up to how the agents work together to manage the biosphere. And humans we can be argued to have the role of stewardship in the sense of, well, as I've argued, we have this natural language semantic capacities that nothing else has. So we've developed this sense of meta awareness of our environment, and we're able to kind of be aware that we're part of this cycle, or we're aware of all these abstractions around us, but we don't, as implied by bounded rationality, that we are imperfect reasoners. We can't know everything. But yet, because we have these natural language semantic capacities, that means, and we're conscience. That makes us conscience aware, not conscious. I don't like the term consciousness very much, but I mean conscience, not conscious. So I just want to clear that up, because maybe sometimes people think I say conscious aware, but what I mean by conscience aware is that we kind of delegate certain ways of 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 in consensus of, okay, what is a right or wrong way in which we should engage with one another and our environment. Like, what are things I should or should not do, in which I might be deceiving myself or other agents, and or other agents and what is the best way I can preserve and optimize fitness, right? So, this has to do with like, okay, like leveraging trade-offs amongst fellow agents and my environment, being aware and uh, conducting these abstract, elaborate thought processes with the capacity of natural language, semantic structure, cohesion. This represents how we are. This explains why we are created in the image of God in the metaphysical sense, right? So, man is created in the image of God. This is mentioned throughout Scripture. I think it's even mentioned in Genesis 1, right? But anyway, building on to that, right? So this means God. So this is where there might be some contention here between my perspective and the mainstream Christian apologist perspective, because I don't accept the ontological argument. I don't think God is responsible for everything. I think that God is this is the perceivable universe of abstraction that has been made possible. On the one hand, like God is responsible for that because we optimized our capacity as a society of agents to coordinate with each other through natural language. So we persisted in this capacity to engage with each other to optimize our fitness. And that, the potential of that represents God. So I think some of these remarks are going to clear up those insights. But so God is also not an agent, but contingent upon group actionable outcomes of human-like agents as symbiotic optimal outcomes of group and ecological trade-offs, right? So that, again, I mentioned the Gaia hypothesis. I mentioned how we have this conscious awareness. It's building on that. God being omnipotent does not necessarily mean he can do anything. I think omnipotence has to do with the exhaustive good faith acting outcomes that can arise from group actions of human-like agents. So God, in this sense, is like perceptually inexhaustible. It's, like how many ways can I think about how I can do something nice for somebody, right? I mean, I might have a limit, there might be, uh, you know, depending on like who I'm trying to be, do something nice for, my options might have some constrained range of limitations, but, it's, there's so many ways I can do something for myself or others, and how I engage with my environment, like, and then how you have different, you do one, you commit to an action, and then there's different trajectories in which you can do different actions, right? So you have a whole field of, you have a whole field of outcomes, right? You think of, the term field as in like all these different ranges of trajectories. So in the last video I gave the most simple example of like, okay, if I try and throw a ball up in the air and I have a free body diagram, there's different ways I can change the angle, and like that's just perceivably inexhaustible, right? Because I could just keep changing the angle ever so slightly to throw the ball up in the air, and that's going to impact its trajectory. But all possibly inexhaustible uh, ranges of trajectories represent the field, right? So God would represent like this, this potential of good faith acting would be like all these inexhaustible ways in which combinatorially combinations of different size groupings of humans coordinate with each other, right? So it has to be human-like agents, right? Because I emphasize natural language semantic capacities of how we reason to be, how we're created in God. It represents the manifestation of of God's image. Well, Ryan dropped out, but for the viewers, I'll wait for him to. I'll wait for him to come back. Let's see what happens. Give me 1 second. So, like I'm gonna say with Ryan, and hopefully this doesn't end up becoming a monologue. If it does, I will try to cut short on time because I do recall going through a lot of these talking points, right? Um, now, and I think Ryan already kind of went through a number of these uh, talking points since I was sharing my screen here. But okay, so right, mentioned about God being omnipotent, how omnipotent doesn't mean knowledge of everything necessarily, but it has to do uh, with the inexhaustible outcomes of good faith acting. So um, that's what omnipotence has to do with, from my framing. Now, like I'm going to mention with Ryan, hopefully he jumps back on the call. Building on omnipotence, then, um, right? The problem of evil that is commonly brought up in the apologetics arena is then the contention of good faith acting as opposed to bad faith acting. So that then has to do with on the one extreme, the most extreme ways in which deception can happen amongst ourselves and each other, and then on the other extreme, the most optimal ways in which we can coordinate with each other, um, uh, to preserve our fitness, and like hoping for the best, that sort of ordeal, hoping the best, the outcomes we are looking forward to play out, given that those outcomes do not violate intentionally the well-being of other agents that are coordinating together, right? So I think I guess some people have contention wrestling with that, but for me that makes a lot of sense. Um, so I think in my previous sessions, I went over some of these talking points. I think there's some fewer remarks that I might have made that I might have not mentioned in the previous session. So I'm going to build on these remarks, and then I do want to get into talking about, okay, well, how can we have uh, a coherent conversation about the prospects of artificial intelligence systems development, and having a conversation about theology. I guess since no one else is joining, I'm going to frame it around talking about the Bible. And like I mentioned earlier, I do. Uh, Maybe this is a soft disclaimer because I did mention that this is an interfaith focused dialogue. So this the way I'm framing this discussion is based on like kind of the comfort zone for how I'm going to lay it out and make sense of it. So like that's not to say that there can be an equal frame there. I think there, like I said, we can have framings, the metaphysical framings I'm making, um, the from a different faith. It's like whether you're a Muslim or Mormon or whatever. I think if you use the right metaphysical toolkit and constructions to work with, I think that you're going to get the same kind of framing that I'm going to get. So okay, anyway. Um, Now, let me just double check here because I'm want to see. Um, uh, um, okay, maybe it's worth going. I can't tell if I did work through these comments last time, so I'm gonna go through these remarks that I made on Clubhouse because I'm not sure about these. I know I went through the ones I went through earlier, but just maybe because this is going to build on pretty well. Okay, so let's talk about some very uh, stereotypical framings that Christian apologists get gunned down for. So first off, let's go with the fine tuning argument because I think that's a bit problematic. And so I'll read it out here and then I'll elaborate on it a bit more. Fine tuning can be reframed by niche-ifying. So niche-ifying, natural selection for psychosocial framing of human-like agents, because the agents envelop the capacity of natural language through robust written and oral grammar structures that gives humans a unique capacity to conceptualize abstractions such as the Christian God. Human-like, as in the species has cognitive capacities to use language-based grammar systems to such sophistication comparable to humans. But you must understand humans have fitness disadvantages compared to other species of mammals, even. So mammals being an example. Arguably, birds have maybe the best fitness advantage in the long run. We'll see how things play out. And if humans get past stage 2 and we could get into stage 3, I'll make some remarks about type 1 as type 2 and type 3 civilization and how that might play out into with talking about the prospects of artificial intelligence systems, right, going forward, and how that has any how that can contribute to any meaningful conversation from theological framing. So God has to be more specific and contextually constrained to anthropomorphizing collective human psychology, right? Because a lot of what's mentioned, especially Old Testament or New Testament, we can place ourselves into the lives of the 12 apostles on the one hand, and we can we there are moments in which we relate to the moments in which a lot of the famous moments in which Jesus conducts himself, right? Whether it's the moment like that, the moment they were out in the boat, right? Where that famous moment where Jesus was out on the river and asked Peter to go out to him, right? And Peter was nervous, and then he was all right, but that does become significant when we get to the new covenant, when the new covenant is formed, right? When all the 12 apostles are there before, especially like leading to the crucifixion of Christ, right? Like how the story plays out. So, um, but we're not going to get into all that. I mean, I might get into some bits of that, but we'll see. So everything. So you know the relating to um moving forward here. So everything is not created by God. God is a projection of human-like agent collaboration and how good actors push for symbiotic cooperation collectively as well as ecologically. It's about the inexhaustible possibilities in which human-like agents behave as good faith actors, where a good faith actor optimizes fitness of the collective grouping of agents and each individual representative agent of the group. Likewise, such good faith actors must also cooperate to optimize ecological constraints. And I'm going to read through a little bit more of these and then see how we can build into talking about artificial intelligence. Uh, Given it's a monologue session at this point, and I don't want to be on too long. Okay. If we say God is an associated subset of agent-based coordination, agent-based coordinated interaction possibility states, and necessarily say these possibility states are restricted to the subsets of good faith interactions, I think we have a reasonable starting point for talking about God. Additionally, these possibility states are perceptually inexhaustible, right? I've mentioned that already. Good God, then, is not an agent, and this is compatible with the Muslim and Christian framing, as I mentioned, of man is created in God's image. Man has to manifest God's image in their actions towards selves, one another, and ecosystems in order to combat evil. Suffering is not necessarily evil. So I mentioned about sin being a spectrum, right? And how we're bounded reasoners, like we're imperfect reasoners. I mentioned bounded rationality, and we can't help it but sin because sin is imperfection, right? It doesn't mean you're always doing something bad, right? And there are moments, even for the little things that we do wrong, yeah, we do have to redeem ourselves, right? If I hurt myself by tripping over a rock or something, I gotta make sure that I didn't get hurt too bad, or just watch where I'm going next time, right? We can think of like the most simple scenarios of like, making sure I don't trip over a rock. Don't put my hand on the stove when it's on because the stove is hot. Put my hand on it, it's gonna hurt. I might get a third-degree burn or something. Um, the irony of mentioning that, however, I guess is a lot of people like argue like, you know what? God exists because if I put my hand on a hot stove, it hurts. It's not quite like that, right? It's knowing that if we think about like what I should do or what I ought to not do, and then we match that framing here, it's like, yes, that's arguing for a case for God, but again, you have to do this metaphysical gymnastics, right? And if you're not in the mindset to do the metaphysical gymnastics, then and, maybe you find this interesting and you have your own framing to work with too. That's contending against like the theistic, like this post-theistic perspective that I'm propping up, like that's fine. But as long as you have the moral grounding, right? Because I think I had this discussion the other day on Clubhouse. Like one thing that a number of people that are agnostic or atheistic, they bring up that um, it's easy for the theists to have this grounding, right? Because you could just kind of pitfall your way into nihilism if you don't have something there for the moral framing and how you ought to ought not being able to decide right and wrong, right? So this is why I kind of argue about like this meta ethical codification of how we engage each other and like kind of thinking about the Bible as a handbook instead of like not just saying, oh, the Bible is the word of God. Let's just say, okay, you know what, we could consider the Bible to be a handbook, right? That doesn't mean that we kind of are dismissive of it's I think like saying, oh, you know what, this is the word of God, that's some tricky wording to play around with. So unless you don't catch yourself and realize that, you know what, there are moments where I have to engage with the world around me, and not just rely on going through scripture to guide myself, right? I have to um, look at information, evaluate information, or develop the capacity to evaluate certain kinds of information, right? So, like this semblance of accountability, right? Which that plays into stage three, right? So, stage three, when we get to redemption, like this is the fall of man then leads into man developing accountability for the fall in the first place, right? Which is difficult, um, because this has to deal with how do humans resolve conflict amongst each other, right? And this is what like it's kind of comparing like if we were to talk about the three types of civilizations now, the first type being that okay, having having flexible control um, over planetary resources and being able to maintain a global population, and not being not over or under exploiting those resources, right? So a type one civilization, which humanity is not even that type one yet, for those who are curious or have looked into type one as opposed to type two and type three civilization, right? So type two. Well, actually, you know what? Let me pause this. I'll get back to this page, but I want to show the different types of civilizations. So let's do that real quick. Type two. So we have this thing called the Kardashev scale. So let me share my screen again. I have to share and unshare it because it's kind of in the way of my browser, and they haven't fixed that issue with Zoom. So I'm a little upset about that. All right, so we have a planetary civilization, which is a type one. So this means that this level involves a civilization that has mastered the use of all available energy sources within a planet's ecosystem, including solar, wind, and geothermal power. They effectively control and utilize all energy resources on their planet. So we're not there yet. Don't think we are, because we're having a hard time with solar, wind, and geothermal power, and we kind of overexploit certain aspects of our ecosystem for better or worse. So we're not even there yet, right? I mean, so okay, well, now it just comes to scaling, right? You go from planetary to harnessing the power energy of your solar system star. So a type 2 civilization, as explained here. Mind you, this is the AI overview provided by Google when I type in type 1 versus type 2 versus type 3 civilization. But I think this is a good overview here. This level represents a civilization that has progressed beyond planetary energy consumption and can harness the energy of its star. This could involve constructing a Dyson sphere or other large structures to collect stellar energy, right? And then you have the galactics. You go from solar to galactic. So it's a matter of scale in terms of resource expenditure to manage a population of a species that outgrows its planetary boundaries, right? So it's necessary to progress these different types based on the population density of a species that has the capacity of natural language, um, uh, semantic structured cohesive use that leads to the possibility of having a society of agents that can scale up or down for better or worse, right? So here, type 3 galactic civilization, as it says here, a type 3 civilization is capable of utilizing the energy of an entire galaxy. encompassing all stars, black holes, and other galactic objects. This level suggests an advanced civilization with interstellar capabilities and immense power. All right, so now, I mean, I think basically like comparing this to the three stages, right? Like I mentioned, creation, the fall, and of course, redemption, right? I mean, in the scalability sense, man, we have to redeem, we have to get to stage three in order to become a type one civilization. Then we might scale down or scale up depending on how things play out, right? So we might be able to develop we might be able to uh, uh, be type 1 and then we have problems getting to type 2. There might be certain constraints that don't allow us to get to stellar interstellar energy consumption, that might, that's why I say there's contention about the three stages, that whether we go from stage, we 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 go from stage 1 to stage 2 almost immediately, right? Because of bounded rationality. So we're already starting. Um, well, I mean, as once we get society, we move to stage 2, right? So when we're no longer cavemen, we're at stage 2. That's the ordeal, because we already accomplished stage 1, and then we're at stage 2 when we're no longer cavemen. We have language systems, and we have written and oral grammar and all. We have all this good stuff that gets us to industrious society, right? That gets us to stage 2. Now, with stage 2, if we manage to resolve conflict amongst ourselves as a species, maybe there might be problems with getting to type 1. So getting to stage 3 doesn't necessarily guarantee we'll hit type 1 civilization, right? But okay. I think I want to work through the rest of my clubhouse remarks, and then we'll move on from there. So okay, let me stop share real quick, and I got to reshare again because it just makes me do that, or maybe there's something I don't understand here. Uh, let's see. Hide video panel. No, whatever. Okay. Um. All right, then. I already mentioned this part. So, man has to manifest God's image in their actions towards selves. Okay, I mentioned that. God is both personal and interpersonal. There is special and general revelation to consider, respectively, right? So, um, moments of divine revelation would be um, once we developed this capacity to communicate each other, or even getting there, um, we had to come up with forms of conduct to engage with one another, right? So coming, this kind of basically builds on, I believe it's Exodus 20, where Moses has the stone tablets, and he's proposing the Ten Commandments, right? All the things we should or shouldn't do, right? This kind of leads to like a governance structure of social cohesion, of how agents ought to not communicate, coordinate with each other, right? So this is an example of like having a metaphysical depiction of divine revelation. It's like, okay, there are certain ways in which we ought to engage and conduct ourselves that leads to preferable outcomes. Like, given that if we do not coordinate in this fashion, if we do not have a code of conduct, that this code of conduct probably being the more maybe the most obvious and best way to explain what is meant by a divine revelation. And this would represent a general revelation, right? So being that this is tied to the interpersonal dynamics in which we coordinate with each other, how we negotiate, how we conduct ourselves towards each other. Now, special revelation would be, personal as opposed to interpersonal accountability. There's personal, that there's things that we hold deep to ourselves, and they're personal beliefs and what have you. How we guide our thought processes, right? Those would be moments of special revelation. So the process of like uh, how we as individual agents plan and conduct decisions, right? And how we evaluate decisions is, you could say this is special revelation. Although, there could be contention of what we call certain moments of special and general revelation. And these would be moments in life that there are signs or moments that we hold sacred, right? So, for instance, like the moment that we develop a code of conduct to like in Exodus 20, the Ten Commandments, that represents general revelation. Like, so there's certain moments, right? Not every way that we conduct each other, or every process that we evaluate, that like important moments in which we have reevaluations of recurring moments in our lives that represent certain um, nudging our intuition. There's certain important moments in which, in our personal lives that, nudges us to carry ourselves a certain way, that that impacts us in the long term, right? That's personal revelation. While a general revelation, it impacts the whole group of agents interacting with each other. So, like mentioning the code of conduct, right? Like how we develop a code of conduct. And then another moment of general revelation, which would be more recent, would be the development of industry, right? So this is kind of scaling and changing the dynamic in which how societies function based on like what technologies we didn't have access to in the past before the rise of industry. So this would represent another moment of general revelation that this is impacting our long-term behavior of how we interact interpersonally. So, not so just to kind of cover some confusion on like how general revelation is meaningful as opposed to it sounds like general revelation is a lot more meaningful than special revelation, but again, we consider moments of special revelation to be like moments that really impact our personal lives. Like there's certain recurring themes and recurring judgments or recurring ways that we have to evaluate how we carry ourselves, or just there's certain those would that are personal to ourselves, and other people might relate to that, but this is special revelation has to do with those recurring moments that we notice, like certain things that nudge our intuition in a significant way in our lives in a personal sense. That's special revelation as opposed to general revelation where it impacts the whole group, not necessarily um, um, Yeah, so it impacts the whole group. So special revelation moments, they can impact multiple members of the group, but it might not impact a significant amount of the group, right? I mean, you know, it could, but it's a fraction of the group as opposed to the whole group. So, I mean, there might be contention there to resolve special revelation or general revelation, but since this is a monologue here, I'm going to be mindful of that. Okay. So, all right. So I'm almost done going through these remarks here, and then I want to make some remarks on what about talking about AI systems and talking about theology a little bit here. Um, when we mentioned God being the potential of goodness for human-like agents, so that means God is a collective action ensemble of persons that perceivably inex persons that is perceivably in a God is a collective action ensemble of persons that is perceivably inexhaustible that denotes all potential good actions of human-like agency. God then is a metaphysical conceptualization of collective actionable behavior states leaning towards a symbiotic coherent optimum of all interacting human-like agents. It's a culturally grained concept that considers meta-ethical codification alignment, right? Because we negotiate with each other and we work in groups and we have to consider trade-offs in personal and interpersonal fitness, right? This idea of appreciation and mindfulness, right, builds into that. So God being goodness can be rectified more rigorously with demonstrating cohesive coordination dynamics of a society of human-like agents acting on group preservation fitness dynamics. So we're not going to get into that. I'll consider how I can really get into that another time. Okay, let me stop this screen share. Now, what's interesting is on machine learning Shri Talk server, there was this start of maybe there are kind of like cults or religions that are motivated by AI advances out there, or maybe I would more arguably put to the point that AI can motivate how we think about what it means to be spiritual and have faith. And it's interesting how we anthropomorphize um, the capacity of AI models. A lot of people that aren't affiliated with the AI and machine learning research community in some way are going to kind of they're that they don't understand what's going on under the hood, and they don't have the technical knowledge or whatnot, and they haven't been keeping up with the what the literature is saying about what these systems are capable of. A lot of these people, maybe it's there's a lot of inspiration from especially science fiction books and films and what have you about what could be the future of humanity, what could happen to us, how what could go wrong, what could go good, is it a happy ending, all this kind of stuff. And like this anthropomorphizing of AI models can, on one sense, it can help us think about, okay, well, how should people wait, like, how do we think about how we interact with technology on the one hand? On the other hand, what is technology um, capable of? Or what can different types of technologies do? And I think a lot of the problem has to do with how aware people are about what information that they're getting based on how they engage with the technology that they use, right? Like how they interact with their phones, or whether it's a tablet device or they have a laptop or some kind of desktop computer, right? How informed are like the nature versus nurture dynamics play a big role here, but because it's like, okay, how knowledgeable is the person that's interacting, how knowledgeable is each person interacting with these different platforms that they have access to, um, uh, with the use of the internet, right? Because the internet is like, we have this non-local virtual highway of communication and engagement where we could just share information and content. And this is a pretty crazy time to be alive, because on the one hand, people can find a whole lot of content on the internet, right? Because the internet is just like this virtual world that is a subset of our reality, right? So we have this virtual space now that we all are interacting with. That's part of this entire ecosystem based on the infrastructure of the technology and its limitations, right? And that's its own problem, right? Because that then kind of relates to the Tower of Babel problem that's propped up in Genesis. And the Tower of Babel problem is kind of revisited a bit, especially you know uh, after Genesis, getting into moments of revelation and judgment, and whether it's in the book of Daniel, or if it's in Revelation towards the end of the New Testament. There's a this anthropomorphization of AI models kind of relates to, like, how we're built, we're actually quite literally building this toppling tower of human civilization-based achievement, and in a way, like, it's easy for us to take it for granted and deceive ourselves, right? Because like, we can overestimate and or underestimate the capabilities of the tools we use to interact with each other and work together, for better or worse, right? Um, and I think that really plays a lot into the biblical context, because even though we have this virtual space that we're engaging in, it's not separate from the reality that we're experiencing. It's a part of the reality we're experiencing. It impacts our capacity to make thoughtful decisions, right? How we conduct ourselves, right? So, so a big issue is, we jumped the gun about the capabilities of these technologies on the one hand, and on the other hand, like, it's like, what is the, are we mindful of, like, what it's costing us, and like how it's impacting our surroundings and how it's impacting each other? So I think on the one hand, well, really, it builds on the Tower of Babel problem, and especially, going back to the problem of evil, technology can be used as a tool for people to manipulate and deceive one another as well. Right? So, I think, those are big talking points to deal with, and I think what is most, uh, I guess, prevalent in having a discussion about AI models and talking about faith is mostly a problem with ethics, and a lot, the alignment problem, assuming that the possibility that the systems that we're building have some capacity of agency, that they might have some way of reasoning with us, and that we ought to be mindful of how we build out these systems, how they scale out, the safety measures and precautions that we ought to take, and in terms of not only how we're exploiting resources to build infrastructure and like to manage these systems at scale, because in order to have these systems operate and be maintained, it's going, we need to we that's that's going to be a resource cost. We have to consider trade-offs. So not only do we have to think about in a sense it's um, it's like, okay, are these models capable of reasoning like humans, right? Like, do we think of them being created? Like, is it possible that these systems can have conscience awareness like humans, right? Like, can they actually, you know, are is it possible that the systems that we're interacting with, as we develop them over time, or certain types of systems might have this capacity of human reasoning, and then it's as if humans have projected um, that image of themselves onto the technologies that we take for granted, right? So building on the alignment problem, of course, I think that that's a lot of this really, I guess no matter what way you look at it, maybe it boils down to the alignment problem, but then you can kind of think about, scalability constraints in terms of like, are we overexpending on like planetary resources? Is that going to have an impact on our ecosystem? So this is not necessarily doesn't necessarily have to do with assuming that we can develop technologies that can reason like humans, or maybe they're some of the capabilities of the technologies is inspired by human reasoning, in which it complements our capacity to engage with each other and our environment. So. I think I'm gonna call it a session. I don't really have anybody here to interact with. Ryan was on here earlier, but he had to drop off. But I think I gave a good um, a good amount of content to build on for the next session. So I'll see you guys another time. Take it easy.